My parents left me nothing, but they gave my older brother everything. And then, my name is Victoria Hayes. I'm 28 years old. My parents gave my brother a penthouse, and all I got was an empty parking space. You can sleep under the stars. They laughed. But even so, I built my career. Now they're begging me. It all started in Columbus, Ohio, the day the lawyer read my grandparents' will in our family home. The room was quiet as he went through the list of assets. When he said my older brother would get a luxury penthouse downtown, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private balcony overlooking the entire city skyline, my parents smiled with pure satisfaction, as if everything was going exactly as it should. Then it was my turn. The lawyer cleared his throat and announced my inheritance in an abandoned parking lot on the north side of Columbus. Cracked concrete, weeds pushing through the asphalt, and over $15,000 in unpaid back taxes. That was it. Nothing more. I sat there in silence while my parents started laughing. You can sleep under the stars. Victoria, my mom said between chuckles. Maybe this will build some character. My dad nodded and added, your brother has always been the responsible one. This is what he deserves. Their words cut deep. They didn't even pretend to be fair. That single afternoon changed everything for me. I walked out of that house carrying more than just a worthless piece of land. I carried a decision. If you've ever been the unfavored child in your family, the one who always got scraps while your sibling received everything, smash that like button right now. Subscribe for the full story, because trust me, what happened next will shock you. And comment down below, have you ever been given nothing while your brother or sister got everything? This story is entirely fictional. I drove straight back to my small apartment on the east side of Columbus that same evening. The house I grew up in suddenly felt too heavy to stay in any longer. I dropped my keys on the counter and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop open. For the first time since the lawyer finished reading the will, I allowed myself to look at the reality of what I had been given. The parking lot sat on the north side of the city, far from the shiny downtown buildings. It was nothing but cracked pavement and overgrown weeds. Still, something clicked in my mind while I stared at the property records. I had spent 6 years working in auto shops after trade school, learning how to detail cars, fix minor issues, and keep vehicles running for long shifts. Every day, I saw ride-share drivers and delivery workers struggling to keep their cars clean and presentable between trips. They needed a quick, reliable place to get their vehicles prepped without losing hours of work. That was when I picked up my phone and called Paige Foster. She had been my closest friend since trade school, the one who always stayed late helping me practice techniques on practice cars. Paige answered on the second ring. Hey, Victoria, how did the will reading go? She asked right away. I told her everything without holding back. The penthouse for my brother, the empty lot for me. The way my parents laughed it off like it was some kind of joke. Paige listened quietly until I finished. That's messed up, she said. What are you going to do with the lot? I took a deep breath. I'm turning it into something useful. I want to create a service for ride-share and delivery drivers. A place where they can get their cars detailed, tires checked, windows cleaned, and minor prep work done fast. I'm calling it Metro Fleet Prep. It won't be a full garage, just efficient prep and cleaning focused on fleet vehicles that are on the road all day. Paige didn't hesitate. That actually sounds smart. Those drivers are everywhere in Columbus now. They're always complaining about not having time for car washes or maintenance. You could charge per service and build volume. We talked for over an hour. I explained how the location on the north side was actually convenient because many drivers operated between the airport, downtown, and the suburbs. Paige suggested we start small and focus on speed. No fancy waiting lounge at first, just fast turnaround so drivers could stay on the clock. The next morning I drove out to the parking lot to survey it myself. I walked every section, noting the worst cracks in the concrete and the areas where water pooled after rain. I measured the space and made notes about where I could add covered bays for detailing work. I counted how many cars could fit comfortably at one time without blocking traffic flow. By the end of the day, I had a rough list of immediate repairs: patching the asphalt, installing better drainage, adding lighting for evening hours. and setting up basic water and power connections. Back at my apartment, I started calculating costs. New asphalt patching would run several $1,000s. Basic equipment for interior cleaning, pressure washers, and vacuum stations added up quickly. I made a spreadsheet with 3 columns: must-have items, nice-to-have tools, and monthly operating expenses once we opened. I kept the numbers realistic. No big loans yet. Just what I could scrape together from my savings and small side jobs. Then came the first real obstacle. I pulled up the official property records and tax documents for the lot. The back taxes were higher than I expected, and the city of Columbus had specific zoning rules for commercial vehicle services. I needed to check the exact requirements for a fleet preparation business. The online portal showed that any new commercial operation on that site required updated site plans, proof of tax clearance, and approval from the transportation department because of the increased traffic it might bring. I spent the rest of the afternoon downloading forms and reading through the city codes. Some sections were confusing, especially the parts about stormwater management and signage limits. I highlighted the deadlines and made a separate list of documents I still needed to gather. For the first time, the project felt heavier than I had imagined. The lot wasn't just land. It came with layers of paperwork and past debts that the city expected me to handle before I could even pour new concrete. Still, I didn't stop. I printed the forms, organized them in a folder, and set them on my table next to the cost spreadsheet. This was my starting point, and I was determined to move forward one step at a time. Within the next week, Paige and I started tackling the official paperwork. We drove downtown to the Columbus City office and submitted the initial application for a commercial fleet preparation license. The clerk handed us a thick stack of forms and explained that everything had to be reviewed by 3 different departments. I filled out the business structure section while Paige double-checked the zoning compliance pages. We attached the site plan I had sketched and the tax clearance letter I managed to obtain after 2 phone calls. The whole process took 4 hours that first day, but we left with a receipt showing our file number and a promise that we would hear back within 30 business days. The following Monday, we moved on to the physical work. I found a small local contractor through an online directory and hired 2 guys to handle the heavy repairs on the parking lot. They arrived early with a truck full of equipment and started patching the worst cracks in the asphalt. I stood there with a clipboard, pointing out the areas that needed the most attention. We also had them install a simple drainage system so water would no longer pool in the middle. Next, they built 2 basic covered bays using metal framing and heavy-duty tarps that could be rolled up in good weather. I watched them connect the new water lines and test the pressure to make sure we would have enough flow for the detailing equipment. While the crew worked outside, I focused on the tools we would actually use. I drove to a supply store on the west side and bought 2 professional pressure washers, several wet-dry vacuums, and a set of interior cleaning kits. Back at the lot, I spent the entire afternoon assembling the equipment myself. I mounted the vacuums on rolling carts so they could be moved easily between cars. I tested each machine twice, adjusting the spray nozzles until the pressure felt right for quick jobs. My hands were sore by the end of the day, but seeing the gear lined up and ready made the project feel more real. Then the city sent the first setback. A letter arrived in my mailbox stating that our application was incomplete. They wanted a full stormwater management study, a traffic impact report for the increased number of vehicles, and proof that the signage would meet new height restrictions. I read the list 3 times and felt the weight of it. Paige came over that same evening after her shift. She sat at my kitchen table with me and helped organize the additional documents. She called the transportation department while I filled out the new forms, explaining our answers line by line so we would not miss anything. Her calm voice kept me from getting overwhelmed when the clerk on the phone asked for yet another diagram. We worked side by side for the next 10 days. Paige handled most of the technical drawings because she had taken an extra drafting class in trade school. I made the phone calls to the contractor to adjust the drainage plan and paid the extra fee for the revised site survey. Every time I felt like the paperwork would never end, Paige reminded me why we were doing this. She pointed out that once the license came through, the first drivers would show up and the whole thing would start making sense. Her support turned the frustrating process into something we could actually finish together. Finally, we submitted the complete package with every required attachment. The clerk stamped it and told us the review clock had started again. I locked the folder in my car and drove back to the lot where the new concrete patches were already drying under the afternoon sun. The covered bays stood ready, and the equipment waited in neat rows. The project was moving forward, even if the city still held the final approval in their hands. I stood there for a moment, looking at what we had already built, and knew the next steps would come when they were supposed to. 2 months later, the city finally approved the last documents. I received the official license in the mail and immediately posted a simple sign at the entrance of the lot. The first week we opened for soft launch with just a few regular drivers who found us through word of mouth. Business was slow but steady, and I spent most days handling jobs myself while learning how to schedule appointments efficiently. Then my phone rang one afternoon with an invitation I almost declined. My mother called to say the family was having a dinner to catch up at their house the following Saturday. She sounded cheerful, as if nothing uncomfortable had ever happened between us. I agreed to go, telling myself it might be a chance to show them the license and the progress we had made. Saturday evening, I arrived at the familiar house carrying a small box of pastries. My parents greeted me at the door with smiles that felt a little too wide. Logan was already seated at the dining table, scrolling through his phone. The penthouse keys sat openly on the sideboard like a trophy. We sat down to eat, and for the first 15 minutes the conversation stayed light, mostly about neighborhood news and my father's recent golf game. Then my mother turned to me with a bright expression. "So, Victoria, how is that little parking project of yours coming along? Still trying to turn that dusty lot into something?" I set my fork down and answered calmly that we had received the full license and started accepting our first customers. Before I could say more, Logan let out a short laugh. "Metro fleet prep sounds fancy for a bunch of cracked concrete. You really think rideshare drivers are going to trust some random lot on the north side run by one person?" My father nodded along, cutting into his steak. "Your brother has a point. That penthouse he received is in a prime location. He's already got offers to rent out the extra rooms for good money. Some projects just need the right foundation. And others, well, they teach you humility." The words landed heavily around the table. My mother added with a chuckle, "We only want what's best for you, honey. Maybe this experience will help you understand why we made the decisions we did with the will." Logan leaned back in his chair, still smiling. "I told some guys in the local business group about it yesterday. They thought it was pretty funny, too. A girl trying to run a fleet service without any real experience or backup. Good luck getting anyone to show up." I felt the shift in the air. The dinner continued with more comments like that, each one wrapped in casual laughter. They never raised their voices, but the message was clear. My project was something to joke about, not something to take seriously, something to take. I left the house earlier than planned, citing an early morning appointment. On the drive home, my phone started buzzing with messages. 3 different people I knew from the auto community texted to ask if the rumors were true. One asked why I was opening a questionable service that might not even last 6 months. Another mentioned seeing a post in the Columbus Driver Network group warning people to be careful with new detailing spots that lacked proper reviews. I pulled over and checked the group myself. Logan had posted under his name, sharing just enough details to make the whole idea sound risky and unprofessional. He didn't name me directly, but everyone who knew our family would understand exactly who he meant. The comments below his post were a mix of jokes and cautious advice. That night, I sat in my apartment and realized this was no longer just family teasing. My own brother had taken the first active step to undermine what I was building. The sabotage felt real for the first time, and it came from the people who were supposed to support me the most. I saved the screenshots and closed the app, knowing I would have to deal with the consequences of that dinner in the weeks ahead. 3 months after we opened, the real pressure began. I walked into the local bank branch with a complete business plan, 6 months of projected revenue, and the newly approved license. The loan officer reviewed everything carefully before looking up and shaking his head. He explained that without a male co-owner or manager listed on the documents, the bank could not approve the working capital loan I needed for equipment upgrades and marketing. He cited risk factors for new single-operator businesses in the service sector and suggested I come back with a partner. I left the meeting with the folder still in my hand, the rejection letter already printed. That same week, the problems escalated quickly. One morning, I arrived at the lot to find the water supply completely cut off. The electric meter showed an unexpected shut-off notice as well. I called the utility companies and learned that someone had filed disputes on the account, claiming the usage was unauthorized. It took 2 full days of back-and-forth calls and proof of ownership to get the services restored. During those 48 hours, we lost every scheduled appointment and had to refund several drivers who showed up ready for service. Then the reviews started appearing. On Google and in the main Columbus rideshare driver group, new accounts left detailed negative comments. They claimed our work was sloppy, that cars came out with streaks and missed spots, and that the location felt unsafe at night. Some posts warned others to avoid us entirely. The ratings dropped fast, and the number of new inquiries slowed to almost nothing. I read through every comment, noting the similar wording and timing. None of the complaints matched the jobs we had actually completed. By the end of that week, I sat in my car outside the lot and seriously considered walking away. The combination of the loan denial, the sudden utility issues, and the flood of bad reviews made the entire project feel impossible. The savings I had left were disappearing faster than expected, and the silence from potential customers was louder than any argument. For the first time, I wondered if my family had been right about the whole idea. Paige showed up unannounced that evening with coffee and a notebook. She listened while I described the bank meeting and the utility shutoffs. Then she helped me pull up the review accounts. We noticed that several of the negative profiles had been created within the same 24-hour window and used very similar language. Paige suggested we stop reacting publicly and start documenting everything quietly. She stayed late, helping me screenshot every post, note the dates, and save copies of the utility dispute records. Instead of answering the reviews or confronting anyone immediately, I decided to focus on gathering solid evidence. I installed a basic security camera at the entrance and began keeping detailed logs of every job, including before and after photos for each vehicle. I also started recording all incoming calls and marking the times when strange complaints came in. Paige offered to help cross-check the information against public records where possible. Her practical approach pulled me back from the edge and turned my frustration into a clear plan. We worked through the next several evenings organizing the files. I refused to post any defensive replies online. Instead, I concentrated on the few loyal drivers who continued to return, making sure their cars received extra attention. The evidence folder grew thicker each day, but I kept it private for now. The sabotage was no longer hidden, and I knew the next moves had to be careful and deliberate if I wanted to protect what I had built. 4 months in, the evidence started to connect. While reviewing security footage from the entrance camera, I noticed a familiar car pulling up late one evening. The driver stepped out, looked around quickly, and placed several printed papers on the windshield of cars parked nearby. The next morning, those same papers turned out to be flyers warning drivers about our service. I froze the frame and zoomed in. It was Logan. He had visited the lot when I wasn't there. Later that same day, I checked the email account I had set up for business inquiries. Among the usual messages was one forwarded from a group administrator. The original sender had used an address I recognized as one Logan sometimes used for side projects. In the thread, he encouraged members to leave honest feedback about new detailing spots, specifically mentioning our location and suggesting the operation might not meet safety standards. The wording matched the negative reviews almost exactly. I saved everything and called Paige over immediately. We sat together and pieced the timeline together without jumping to conclusions. The utility disputes, the sudden reviews, and now the flyers all pointed back to the same source. Instead of confronting him right away, we decided to use the information to strengthen our position. Paige helped me organize the files into a clear chronological order with timestamps and screenshots. With the proof in hand, I chose to move forward publicly rather than hide. I planned a small grand opening event for the following Saturday afternoon. I contacted 2 local reporters from Columbus news outlets who covered small business stories. I also invited every driver who had ever used our service, offering free basic interior cleaning for the first 20 cars that showed up. I kept the invitation simple and focused on showing the actual work we could deliver. The day of the event arrived with clear skies. About 30 drivers turned up, along with one television crew and a reporter from the business section of the paper. I demonstrated the full process on a volunteer vehicle while explaining how Metro Fleet Prep was designed for fast turnaround. Drivers asked questions about pricing and scheduling. The camera crew filmed the covered bays and the equipment in action. I answered every question honestly, including the early challenges we had faced with city approvals. Toward the end of the afternoon, Logan appeared at the edge of the lot. He had apparently heard about the event through the same community groups. Several drivers recognized him and the atmosphere shifted.
One of the reporters noticed the tension and asked if there was any family connection to the business. I looked directly at Logan and stated calmly that my older brother had expressed strong doubts about the project from the beginning. I then mentioned that recent actions, including unauthorized flyers and coordinated feedback, had raised serious questions. I did not accuse him outright on camera, but I presented printed copies of the email thread and still images from the security camera for the reporter to review privately. Logan's face tightened. He tried to laugh it off and claim it was all a misunderstanding, but the drivers who had seen the flyers earlier in the week started asking him direct questions. The reporter took notes and asked for his side of the story. Logan gave short answers before excusing himself and leaving the lot quickly. By the end of the event, we had collected contact information from nearly all the attendees. The local news segment aired 2 days later, highlighting the service as a practical solution for busy fleet drivers in Columbus. Calls and bookings increased noticeably after the coverage. Drivers who had hesitated before now scheduled appointments, and several mentioned they appreciated the transparency shown during the event. The public confrontation had not been loud or dramatic, but it forced the truth into the open. For the first time since we started, the business began receiving steady orders based on real experiences rather than rumors. I updated the evidence file with the new footage from the event itself and kept moving forward. 5 months after the grand opening, the business finally turned a corner. Bookings increased steadily as positive word spread through driver networks. The local news piece had brought in new customers, and many returned because the service was reliable and fast. I expanded the schedule to 7 days a week and hired 2 part-time helpers to handle the growing volume. Revenue climbed each week, allowing me to pay off the initial repairs and invest in better equipment. For the first time, I could see a clear path to stability without relying on anyone else. Then the phone calls started coming from the people I least expected. Logan called late one Tuesday evening. His voice sounded different from the confident tone I remembered at family dinners. He explained that the penthouse he received was becoming a financial burden. The monthly maintenance fees and property taxes were higher than anticipated, and several investments he had made had not performed well. He suggested a partnership where Metro Fleet Prep could operate under his name or share profits in exchange for his business guidance. He even mentioned introducing me to some of his contacts downtown who might bring corporate fleet accounts. I listened quietly while he laid out the proposal. When he finished, I told him directly that I had built the business alone and had no interest in bringing in a partner, especially one who had actively tried to damage its reputation earlier. Logan tried to downplay the past incidents, claiming they were just misunderstandings between siblings, but I refused to engage in that conversation. I ended the call by saying the business was not available for collaboration of any kind. The next morning, my mother called. She spoke in a softer voice than usual and asked how things were going with the lot. After a few minutes of small talk, she got to the point. She and my father were facing unexpected expenses with the house. Medical bills from my father's recent checkup and some home repairs had added up quickly. She wondered if I could help with a short-term loan or even a monthly contribution now that the business seemed to be doing better. She reminded me that families should support each other during difficult times. My father called later that same day. He was more direct. He said Logan had mentioned the penthouse situation and suggested that, as the only one with a growing income, I should step up to help stabilize the family finances. He listed specific amounts they needed for the next few months and offered to oversee some aspects of my operation in return for the assistance. I sat in my office at the lot after the third call and took a moment to process everything. The same people who had laughed at the empty parking space and encouraged doubts about my ability were now reaching out because their own situation had become difficult. I thought about the loan rejection, the utility shutoffs, the negative reviews, and the flyers. None of those problems had solved themselves. When my mother called again the following evening, I gave her a clear answer. I explained that I had worked hard to build Metro Fleet Prep from nothing, and that the business needed every dollar to continue growing and to cover its own obligations. I stated that I would not be providing financial help or entering any partnership. I also made it clear that the past actions from the family had shown me exactly where I stood. My father tried to argue that blood relations should come before business decisions, but I repeated my position calmly and ended the conversation. I blocked the numbers after those calls and focused on the schedule for the rest of the week. The business continued to move forward with its regular customers, and new drivers kept booking appointments based on the improving reviews. The requests from my family did not stop immediately, but each time I responded the same way, politely but firmly declining any involvement. The contrast was impossible to ignore.
While Metro Fleet Prep grew through consistent effort and honest work, the people who had been given everything were now struggling with the consequences of their own choices. I kept my attention on the lot and the drivers who relied on the service, knowing that protecting what I had built was more important than trying to fix problems that were never mine to solve. 6 months after everything began, I made the final decision. I sat at my desk one quiet evening and went through my phone contacts. I blocked every number belonging to Logan, my mother, and my father. I also changed the email settings so messages from their addresses would go straight to spam. There would be no more surprise calls or attempts to pull me back into their problems. The business had its own momentum now, and I refused to let old family ties drain any more of my energy or resources. The consequences for them unfolded quickly in the following weeks.
Logan's penthouse, the one he had received as his main inheritance, went into foreclosure. The bank issued public notices after he missed multiple mortgage payments. The high monthly fees combined with other debts he had accumulated left him unable to keep up. I learned about it through a mutual acquaintance in Columbus who mentioned seeing the listing for the unit. Logan had to move out with little notice, and the luxury property he once showed off was sold at auction to cover what he owed. My parents faced their own reality at the same time. Brian and Sharon Hayes put their family home on the market because they could no longer manage the rising costs, medical expenses, property taxes, and the need to help Logan after he lost the penthouse had stretched their savings too thin. The house sold within a month, and they moved into a smaller rental apartment on the other side of the city. They no longer had the financial cushion they once relied on. I did not reach out to offer help, nor did I attend any family gatherings. There were no dramatic final conversations or attempts at reconciliation. I simply maintained complete distance. When a few distant relatives asked why I was no longer in contact, I gave short, honest answers and left it at that. My focus stayed entirely on Metro Fleet Prep and the team that had helped build it. Looking back at the entire journey, one truth became clear. Blood relation alone does not create obligation. I had been handed an empty parking lot and ridicule, while my older brother received a valuable asset with no expectations attached. Instead of accepting that imbalance, I chose to build something meaningful from what I was given. The sabotage attempts, the public doubts, and the later requests for money all reinforced the same lesson: protecting my peace and my progress mattered more than maintaining connections that only brought harm. Success in this case did not come from family support or inherited advantages. It came from consistent daily effort, learning from every setback, and surrounding myself with people like Paige who offered real help without expecting control in return. Many people stay trapped in toxic family patterns because they fear the guilt of walking away. But walking away can be the healthiest choice when staying means accepting repeated disrespect and unfair treatment. Today, Metro Fleet Prep continues to grow with a steady stream of regular clients. The lot that was once dismissed as worthless now provides reliable service to drivers across Columbus who depend on their vehicles for work. I run the business on my own terms, please, with clear boundaries and no unnecessary drama. The empty parking space my parents gave me ultimately became the foundation for something better than anything they imagined it. And the decision to cut ties completely allowed me to move forward without carrying the weight of their expectations or failures. Family is important, but it should never come at the cost of your own worth or future.